into Pro Football Today. It is time for the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio. Following up the in-game live crew, we got the exciting football one way or another, so I'm not entirely a liar. So Adam has to take half of what he said back. But the final score in the books is 26-18 as the Giants tried to rally in that fourth quarter. But a lot of drops, a lot of issues, a really ugly, weird two-point conversion attempt. There's just a number of things from an entertainment level that we can get into, Tom. But first and foremost, you and I chatted at halftime. What did you make of that second half of this 26-18 victory for the Steelers?
Yeah, second half kind of came live as we spoke about, like, teams were both teams, I should say, were kind of running on the bad side of efficiency, really, really inefficient in the first half. That kind of flipped. We have a lot to break down. Steelers, they looked good. Some good props overall from us on the pregame show. We can certainly get into all of that.
Yeah, very excited to get into that. Some things went really well. Some things went, extremely questionable. Regardless, Tom and I got plenty to get into, as he mentioned, here on the post-game show. So don't go anywhere. Stick with us here on SportsGrid. Also, follow SportsGrid over at SportsGrid as we continue the conversation both on social as well as live. So we'll catch you guys on the other side of this quick break.
Talk about how these series came to a head and what has been happening in this postseason for the Yanks. Offensively, it hasn't been Aaron Judge.
Baseball is such a big win here. All you ask for, East Coast Monster City, West Coast Monster City, the biggest of biggest Titan superstars on both sides here, two mammoth fan bases. The entire country can buy into this one.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
Did they talk about the play they ran at the end of the game when it was the worst players we've ever seen in the history of basketball? No. See, here's what you got to do, Sherwood. I respect you. You're fantastic. But damn it, don't blame the officials. When you have a game like this, that close, there's about 100 or 1,000 different things you could have done differently that could have won you the game.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
I tend to do this a lot, by the way. I do it more in baseball with the anytime home run, where I may play 4 players hit home run. I call it covering the board. If I take 4 players, bet the same amount on each, I only need to hit 2 of them and I win money.
He's already got, 438 rushing yards on the season. He's looking like the old LT days where the Chargers were able to have that strong, dominant running back.
Game time decisions, only on SportsGrid.
They lost in Neyland to Tennessee, 24-17. Again, and look, that puts Alabama in a very tough spot. I was looking at the SEC standings just before. They've got 2 losses now in conference because they lost that Vandy game.
They're still one of the top-ranked teams in the country when they lose. Everyone else drops like a brick when they lose, except for Alabama.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Welcome back into Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio here on SportsGrid TV. Starting to break down this Monday Night Football matchup between the Giants and the Steelers. Steelers come out on top 26-18, but it doesn't mean that there weren't moments that the Giants made it interesting, aside from a lot of drops in that two-point conversion-ish thing that tried to happen. We'll get into all of that there, Tom, but first and foremost, let's break this down offense by offense. You got Daniel Jones, 264 passing yards, 1 interception, which everybody had an interception on their board for the most part. Tracy Jr. on the ground, though, 145 rushing yards, 1 tutty. That's through 20 carries. Don't know how many people had that on their bingo card. And then Slayton was the leader through the air, 108 receiving yards through 4 receptions. So what did we make of some of the efforts of the Giants tonight?
This has kind of been the story, not just for them, but a number of teams across the league where we're seeing good performances. And this kind of reminds me of what we saw from the Chargers on Monday night against the Cardinals 2 weeks ago, where we saw Herbert throw for over 300 yards, and they don't score touchdowns. And the Giants came away with one touchdown, and you're looking at these stats just from a box score perspective: 264 from your quarterback. You have a receiver go for 108, another receiver go for 72, and a running back go for 145 yards. And your offense puts up one touchdown. Like that just speaks to inefficiency and kind of what the Giants have been doing all season, where they're not converting in the red zone, penalties are killing them, et cetera, et cetera. So, from a prop perspective, right? Jones flies over his mark, which was below 200. Tracy flies over his mark. We're talking about these running backs, the split between him and Singletary. Both of these running backs were in the 30s. Slayton flies over him. Neighbors, I don't remember specifically what his prop was, but he went over on receptions, 72 yards. He had 13 targets. So from a prop perspective, betting on them, you actually had some success tonight if you were betting on the Giants. From a team perspective, they are terrible and they are inefficient on offense. The penalties are killing them. They cannot convert in the red zone. Sometimes they can't even convert once they get to the 30 or 40, and drives are being stalled by penalties or drops or whatever it might be. So, you can bet on the Giants in terms of a player prop perspective, but I would absolutely not be betting from a spread perspective.
Yeah, not even trying to be funny, in all honesty. There's so many plays that just looked like drunk backyard football. You really wouldn't believe that you were watching a professional team just from some of the mistakes, the miscues, and the drops. And I don't want to put that on any of the players specifically, but it's just tough to do that when you get elevated to the league, such as the Professional Football League. They did defensively come up strong with 3 sacks. We did see that cause some interruption and disruption to the Steelers and some of the momentum they were getting, but regardless, that didn't hinder Russell Wilson's 278 passing yard performance. You had him for the 225 on the long shot, as well as the hint that he could touch 300. You gave everyone caution, maybe don't go that far yet, but you were right on the money in terms of him slamming over that 225 and getting close to that 300. So that's something that you could check off for your like it, love it, leave it. And we all got love it's for that one. So what else worked out for you in terms of the Steelers and what was on your card?
I also spoke about Wilson over 18.5 completions, which he did hit. He had 20. He was 20 of 28, pretty efficient overall. He had 16 last week against the Jets. And, especially in the first half against the Jets, they were just ironing things out on offense. And it's largely what we saw from quarterbacks in week 1, week 2 of the season. We got to remember that was Wilson's week 1 because he hadn't played. So I was expecting more plays, just a little more efficiency from Russell Wilson overall. So he hits over 18.5. He hits the 225 plus, which was up at plus 182. And we saw basically what I was expecting. I spoke heavily about, and he also went over he didn't go over on the touchdowns, which is what I spoke so heavily about. He had multiple touchdowns called back because of penalties. Pickens didn't get his feet down, and that's not to blame Pickens. It was a good defensive play. It was just kind of a random thing where he got 1 foot down twice instead of 2 feet down, 1 each. So Wilson could have legitimately had 3 touchdowns tonight, with 1 being called back from penalty and the other with a feet. So I'm not worried about the SGP not hitting when everything went in line with exactly what I was talking about. He was going to go over on this, over on that, because this is the time that he had to show that he deserves to be the starting quarterback, because there was no concern about Fields coming in because he was inactive tonight. Essentially, he's the emergency quarterback 3. So Pickens ended with 74. I believe he goes over on his mark on that, which was in the 60s. He does not go over his reception total, but I believe it was at 4.5. Did not see Pat Freiermuth go over his reception total of 27.5. He ended with 19. But overall, good stuff from the Steelers. And obviously, Najee Harris, a massive game for him on the ground, 19 and 114. Didn't get the touchdown, but ultimately it was a great game from him.
Yeah, very frustrating point not grabbing that TD, because I know a number of people that also had that on the board there. And then some of the sportsbooks were kind of trying to bait people into thinking that there was going to be a Russell Wilson turnover in terms of an interception, and they were able to kind of clean things up in that category. But regardless, big performance from Harris, as you mentioned. Big performance from Pickens as well, but I was so disappointed to not see that he didn't get just one more reception. That's all I needed. But outside of that, the only thing that really messed me up on my board was the fact that he didn't hit over 4.5 receptions. He was sitting at 61 receiving yards. He did top that one. And then this total, I said that it was going to be funky. It was just a little too low. Anything could really happen with these two teams. As mentioned, a number of people decided to stick with going on the under of this total. But regardless, what did we make of the fact that this is the result, 18-26, before we close out our takeaways of the game?
Yeah, first half, you think we'd be cruising under. You think maybe we get a touchdown from the Steelers just because, again, that red zone inefficiency is going to flip at some point. good offensive teams, they're going to convert the majority of the time in the red zone. And you don't expect the Steelers to go, especially the way they're moving the ball. And that's what it comes down to. You don't expect them to go 0 for 5, 0 for 6 in the red zone. They may not be amazing and go 1 for 6 or 1 for 7, whatever it might be. And that could push the game towards an over at some point. But, you think you would be cruising with the under throughout the first half. And then, the defenses still need a lot of work, especially from the Giants side of things. And, sloppy play caused it to go over. So if you had the Steelers, congrats, that's the winner. If you had the Steelers, if you had the over, congrats, that's the winner. And a lot of the player props hit tonight. So good stuff overall. I know a lot of people probably had Harris TDs, Pat Freiermuth TDs, or Pickens TDs. Those did not come through. But all in all, a pretty exciting game, at least the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of touched already on the Giants, the players, the props, and where you would kind of look at that, but where would you lean in terms of gauging the Steelers and the player props moving forward now that we kind of have a little bit more to compare to from Russell Wilson's week 1 to week 2?
Yeah, it's tough because there's no one player seeing a dominant target share where Pickens has 5 targets, Van Jefferson has 5, Calvin Austin had 4. We're seeing Pat Freiermuth 2, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren had 7 combined coming out of the backfield. So it's a pretty even distribution. I think Pickens may still be the guy in terms of going over on yards just because that's the role he plays. And Van Jefferson may become a sneaky number 2. So it could be Harris and Pickens as a 1A, 1B. And then seeing Van Jefferson as a number 2 option.
All right, so something to continue to look forward to. And then the lesson that I learned today is maybe not receptions, but yardage when it comes for Pickens. I think that chemistry is going to continue to grow.
I said that last week with Cooper Kupp, and the joke that I've made to Ben and Donnie for years is, you can go over yardage. A player can have a 99-yard reception. That's a fact.
Very true.
You can't have over 6.5 receptions on one reception. It sounds silly to say, but you can fly over yards on a single play. You can't fly over attempts or rushing attempts or receptions on one catch. So yards are actually always safer.
Yeah, and you just can't pin down those moments. I've made that mistake all season long, and I'm just going to take a back seat to that. Enough of that for me. I'll stick with the yardage. I'll alt it up or alt it down if need be, if it's not going to be so crazy on the value. But I've learned something today, Tom, when it comes to all of that. Any final thoughts between this 26-18 matchup between the Steelers and the Giants as the Steelers add another W to their column?
Yeah, the Steelers winning is the main thing. The Ravens lost to the Browns. The Steelers pick up a win. So if you have a Steelers ticket, them to make the playoffs, win the division, this is a very, very big game and a big step for them overall.
That is a great point, and a lot of people are going to be gauging that very closely as they wait to see how other Titans in the NFL currently may potentially fall short, which brings up the fact that Tom and I are going to start previewing some games looking ahead. As you guys know, with the Pro Football Today, we got the pregame party that goes down. The party today is ending here shortly, obviously, but then come Thursday, it's me, Tom Vecchio, Dave Sherapan, and Adam Kaufman back at it to get you ready for Texans versus Jets. So make sure you're sticking with us here on SportsGrid TV. As I always remind you, make sure you're following SportsGrid over at SportsGrid on Instagram. It's at SportsGrid TV, as well as keeping track with all of us. We talk throughout the game. We put up our picks of the days. So there's so much to keep based on when it comes to social media. But more importantly here, stick with Tom and I on the other side of this quick break.
Talk about how these series came to a head and what has been happening in this postseason for the Yanks. Offensively, it hasn't been Aaron Judge.
Baseball is such a big win here. All you ask for, East Coast Monster City, West Coast Monster City, the biggest of biggest Titan superstars on both sides here, 2 mammoth fan bases. The entire country can buy into this one.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
Did they talk about the play they ran at the end of the game when it was the worst player screen I've ever seen in the history of basketball? No. See, here's what you got to do, Sherwood. I respect you. You're fantastic. But damn it, don't blame the officials. When you have a game like that close, there's about 100 or 1,000 different things you could have done differently that could have won you the game.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
I tend to do this a lot, by the way. I do it more in baseball, but the anytime home run, where I may play 4 players at home. I call it covering the board. If I take 4 players, bet the same amount on each, I only need to hit 2 of them and I win money.
He's already got 438 rushing yards on the season. He's looking like the old LT days where the Chargers were able to have that strong, dominant running back.
Game time decisions. Only on SportsGrid.
They lost in Neyland to Tennessee, 24-17. Again, and look, that puts Alabama in a very tough spot. I was looking at the SEC standings just before. They've got 2 losses now in conference because they lost that Vandy game.
They're still one of the top-ranked teams in the country when they lose. Everyone else drops like a brick when they lose, except for Alabama.
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Back at it with pro football today here on SportsGrid TV. Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio to run through the Monday night football. In case you missed it, 26-18 Steelers come out on top. But it's time for us to start looking ahead. I love when we get to turn the page on the week. Thursday night football, you'll be joining Tom, myself, Dave, and Adam for the Pro Football Today pregame show. But ahead of that, it's time for us to figure out how we're going to start gauging that matchup. You got Texans taking on the Jets. Spread currently at 1.5. I found this interesting, Tom. On the money line, Texans sitting at plus 100, Jets sitting at minus 118. When it comes to the total, it's 42.5 over under. So how do you start gauging this game?
This one's tough. This is my first look at the props, and based on the injuries that the Texans have, I absolutely want an update on Stephon Diggs, who left with a non-contact injury. We know that Nico Collins is still on IR. I think this immediately points me to Joe Mixon on the ground, who's sitting at 79.5. Looking back over the past few weeks now, Ramondre Stevenson last week for the Pats, 20 for 48 on the ground, 20 carries for 48. We know that the Pats aren't good overall. The week before that, we saw Najee Harris go 21 and 102. And then before that, we saw Ray Davis go 20 carries, 97 yards. So given the fact that A, this is a short week, and B, the Texans are now missing their 2 top receivers, I think this is a Joe Mixon game. It's 79.5 now. I kind of want to jump in now, and come pregame show on Thursday when we're talking, I'm going to be interested to see what that number ends up at if we see this bet up, because if Mixon is at 79 now and we get official word that Diggs is not going to play or something else happens, this number could jump to 82, 83, and it may only seem like 2 or 3 yards, but that's a big difference, right? And we want to jump on numbers early if we're expecting other players to be out. So I have interest in Joe Mixon over. You could have interest in Breece Hall. You could have interest in a Breece Hall combined. I mean, at the end of the day, for Devontae Adams, 57.5 yards is a number he should be able to get to. They traded for him in a reason. He needs the ball ultimately. And we have seen the Texans defense struggle not only last week with Josh Downs having a big game for the Colts, the week before that with the Packers receivers having a big game. So we could actually see some level of production from the Jets offense this week.
Yeah, well, it's kind of do or die for them. I mean, it was very embarrassing to lose in the form and fashion in which they did and whom they lost to. But as they kind of circulated and started off as a joking manner, but now it's not so funny. Adams wants to make sure that he's in a role where he can succeed, and he's chasing a ring. You can't come into an organization that can't find a way to get into the W column and then not be used as much as possible to try to get there. So that just kind of screams bigger game, or hopefully a bigger game for him in terms of when it comes to Hall. I like the combination. I mean, just seeing how they tried to stay and compete last week, he was all over the board. I mean, on the ground, racking it up, through the air, racking it up. He's the go-to guy when they get that stalemate going on and they're trying to figure things out still. In terms of Joe Mixon, love that call because you're looking at the yardage that they've allowed. Harris on the ground versus the Jets the other week, 102. Before that, it was the Bills, and it was all Sweet Baby Ray all day. You were on top of that one, 97 rushing yards. Prior to that, you got the Vikings. I don't have to say much there. I mean, there was a little hesitation. They didn't get much going with Chandler on the ground, but they've only had a certain amount of games where they've been able to kind of reserve the run game of their opponent. But Joe Mixon's not the kind of guy you can really contain, and with some of the inconsistency, I think that could be a fair shot. But when it comes to Adams,
I would also,
a lot more has to keep going. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would also say Adams for a touchdown at plus 140. That's a fair number. Mixon's minus 140 for a touchdown, and Breece Hall is minus 110. Again, these are numbers that I don't like going to for touchdown props. That's just not something I do. I've talked about it plenty of times. I don't lay minus money for a touchdown prop. That's just not something you should be doing if you're asking me perfectly honestly. So Devontae Adams plus 140, I think, is the first spot to go. I think it's interesting that Tank Dell is the next player at plus 185, and then Dalton Schultz is at plus 310, and Xavier Hutchinson is at plus 330. So and Robert Woods at plus 500. So just in terms of looking at the Texans, if you're expecting them to score and you don't want to go to Joe Mixon, there are like massive drop-offs of minus 140 to plus 185 to plus 300. There's going to be some value to be found if Joe Mixon doesn't score.
That's actually a really good point. Kind of carrying that point over to the Jets side of the ball, though, because usually at this point, remove Adams from the conversation. We know that the expectation is high for him. But then where do we put Wilson in this conversation, as well as Tyler Conklin? Because we've seen them rely on Conklin when it comes to the red zone, especially when it comes to touchdowns in the last couple of games, and they've been able to be a little bit more efficient when it comes to finding him in the end zone.
Yeah, Wilson is certainly an interesting option. Again, the Texans' defense would be the struggle point, right? And we haven't seen Adams make a big splash. And Wilson, as much as Adams and Rodgers has played together, like Wilson and Rodgers have the reps this season, and at least they may be in some type of sync. Lazard didn't play. Alan Lazard, didn't play in their recent game against the Pats. If he doesn't play, I'm not going to say like Mike Williams is an awesome option, because obviously after the injury, he's a little bit slower, and it's clear that Wilson and Adams are the top two options. But Mike Williams at plus 450 for a TD, isn't the worst bet in the world, especially when we're getting massive odds if you take a very, very low-risk bet on it if we're not going to see Lazard play. So, yeah, Conklin's up there at plus 450 as well. It's along the same lines. There's just someone else removed from their offense, and someone else can fill that role.
Yeah, good point. What do we think of the quarterbacks and their props thus far? You got Aaron Rodgers at 233.5, but you got Stroud at 221.5 in terms of their passing props. And I know sometimes we gauge what their attempts and stuff would look like. I think that this is probably a good vantage point for both of these quarterbacks.
Yeah, 221. That's definitely downgraded for Stroud, obviously, and it's been creeping down over the few weeks without Collins and now without Diggs. That is certainly low. Stroud 221. I want to have faith that can go over, especially if I'm willing to buy into like a Dalton Schultz TD, someone a little bit longer. And again, we also have to worry about where the Jets are. Not worry about. We also have to consider where the Jets are as a team. Are they just defeated as a team? Or have they given up? That's a real thing. Has this team quit on the coaching staff? Because if they're not going to be showing effort out there, we're going to see opposing teams fly over some props. It may not be this week. It may not be next week. But we get to week 15, 16, the Jets are just done. We'd be seeing a lot of overs.
Yeah, that is a good point. We didn't particularly see big numbers out of Richardson versus the Texans, but when it comes to the Packers, 220 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, so maybe looking at some of those touchdown props, and then you've got Drake May, 243. So Aaron Rodgers' number might be a little touch and go, but we know what Aaron Rodgers can do under pressure regardless. Stick with Tom and I here on SportsGrid TV as we continue to look ahead, and make sure you stick with us on the other side of this quick break.
Talk about how these series came to a head and what has been happening in this postseason for the Yanks. Offensively, it hasn't been Aaron Judge.
Baseball is such a big win here. All you ask for, East Coast Monster City, West Coast Monster City, the biggest of biggest Titan superstars on both sides here, 2 mammoth fan bases. The entire country can buy into this one.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Did they talk about the play they ran at the end of the game when it was the worst player screen I've ever seen in the history of basketball? No. See, here's what you got to do, Sherwood. I respect you. You're fantastic. But damn it, don't blame the officials. When you have a game like this that close, there's about 100 or 1,000 different things you could have done differently that could have won you the game.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
I tend to do this a lot, by the way. I do it more in baseball with the anytime home run, where I may play 4 players at home. I call it covering the board. If I take 4 players, bet the same amount on each, I only need to hit 2 of them and I win money.
He's already got 438 rushing yards on the season. He's looking like the old LT days where the Chargers were able to have that strong, dominant running back.
Game time decisions. Only on SportsGrid.
They lost in Neyland to Tennessee, 24-17. Again, and look, that puts Alabama in a very tough spot. I was looking at the SEC standings just before. They've got 2 losses now in conference because they lost that Vandy game.
They're still one of the top-ranked teams in the country when they lose. Everyone else drops like a brick when they lose, except for Alabama.
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Back at it with pro football today. It's the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio here on SportsGrid TV. We were looking ahead to Thursday Night Football, but as I will remind you again, make sure you join us at 7 o'clock here, Pro Football Today, the pregame show. Me, Tom, Dave, and Adam will break down the lines and odds and all the movements and player prop bets that you're not going to want to miss out on. But it's time to look even further ahead. Let's get over to Sunday. There's a number of division battles taking place. One of the ones we have to start with because of the excitement and the consistency behind the Detroit Lions, but also some news for the Green Bay Packers. Jordan Love gets hurt this past weekend. They're saying it's probably not as detrimental as it initially looked. I believe it was an ankle sprain is the last thing I saw, but I don't want to say anything definitive. Regardless, we've seen the Packers team rally with and without Love. Love helps the consistency be there for this team to make this a better matchup. Spread sitting at 3.5, total sitting at 47.5. How do we start looking at this one Sunday, 4:25 p.m.?
Yeah, this is so it's actually a groin strain for Jordan Love.
Okay,
And
groin.
it's not a knee thing. It's not like a structural thing that he had, obviously dating back to week 1 when they were in Brazil against the Eagles. So we could say that the Lions are absolutely the better team here. Now, we did see Malik Willis start for the Packers, and when he played, they ran like perfect game scripts. What Matt LaFleur, their coach for the Packers, had set for Malik Willis was like spot on. They took care of everything they needed to do. Was like a perfect game plan for Malik Willis. Now, when those games were against the Titans are nowhere near as good as the Lions. The Lions, as I said last night, the Lions are the class of the NFL this season. So Jordan Love, if he doesn't start, I think that's why the line flexed at 3.5, which is past the key number of 3. I have interest in the Lions, but 3.5 is a tough sell for me. I would love to see it at 3. If Jordan Love gets ruled in, that's where it may move back to. This is kind of like just a wait and see because we did get it at 3. Maybe I don't know if it opened at 3 last night. I just didn't happen to see it. I think this game is going to be good. I think we're going to see a defensive battle in this game. I lean on the under on this game. It's a divisional game. Also, historically, where as this week goes on, you will see a lot of people. Jared Goff struggles outdoors. Doesn't matter when he was with the Rams, specifically after he has been traded to the Lions. Jared Goff does not play well when he's outside of a dome or when he's in bad weather. I don't know what the weather forecast is for Green Bay, but we're getting to that portion of the year where it's going to be colder, and unders on his passing yards could be the play. And we look to overs on David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs coming out of the backfield.
Ooh, I like that, especially something to keep an eye on. I mean, you can only ask me so much. I think it's winter here already, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be cold enough and at least windy enough because it was pretty windy in Pittsburgh, and that should carry over throughout the week. Heading to another matchup going down when it comes to division rivalries. You've got the Dolphins taking on the Bills yet again, 1 o'clock on Sunday. 6.5 is where the spread is sitting. We know that Tua returned this past weekend. Not too bad in the numbers category. Started to elevate some of his other weapons around him, but can they be consistent and can they take that next step is the big question. Total sitting at a 49.5. So how do we gauge this Dolphins versus Bills matchup? Because the first one was all Bills.
Yeah, this is, I love the under in this one, 49.5. I think it's just a touch too high. Maybe it was bet up. People are excited that Tua is back. They got the offense moving last week, and you would like to see them continue that. Buffalo is a tough place to play. Buffalo is the better team. You'd like to think that the Dolphins have a chance in this game, again, as I said, to save their season and kind of blew it last week against the Cardinals, with that kind of late game collapse. Like, they need to win this game And the only way they win this game is if they keep Josh Allen and the offense under control. And that means they have to limit their scoring, which means the game would hit the under. So 49.5 and maybe Dolphins 6.5. I think I may end up taking the Dolphins 6.5 in my weekly pick'em pool, but I'm not going to actually bet on them.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. And then one other one that should be a really good one when it comes to the NFC conversation, not division specific. Cowboys taking on the Falcons, 2.5 on the spread, 51.5 on the total. Found the total interesting here, but a little under 2 minutes to go. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, the over, I think, is the play in this one. And I think that this is going to be one of the best games in terms of just production, in terms of player props, just because the Cowboys are terrible on defense. The Falcons are running up the score on everyone, and they're putting up points left and right. They're putting up yards left and right. And this is going to constantly put the Cowboys into a passing game script. And we know their rushing game is absolutely terrible. And it's going to turn into a Dak Prescott over on attempts likely, and probably throwing another pick. Could be a big Drake London game. Could be a big Kyle Pitts game. We saw George Kittle have a huge game last night against the Cowboys. And that could be, spell good things for Kyle Pitts. So I like points in this game and probably a lot of player props, which we'll get into hopefully on Thursday night recap.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be an interesting one to measure half by half as well. But we will probably dive deeper into these after Thursday night football matchups. So you want to make sure you're sticking with Tom and I for all of the Pro Football Today coverage. It'll start on Thursday with the pregame party. Me, Tom Vecchio, Dave Sherapin, and Adam Kaufman. So make sure you guys join us back here on Thursday. But regardless, all football coverage, all sports coverage has you covered here on SportsGrid TV. As for tonight, I hope everybody had a wonderful Monday. We will catch you back here on Thursday for Pro Football Today.